The next thing I remember, there was a thick mist round the ship. Then all the noise was shut off, as if it were all on the other side of a door. We could still see her masts and spars and sails above the misty stuff, and both the captain and the mate said they could see men aloft, and I thought I could, but the second mate wasn't sure. All the same, though, the sails were all loosed in about a minute, it seemed, and the yards mast-headed. We couldn't see the courses above the mist, but Jessup says they were loosed too, and sheeted home along with the upper sails. Then we saw the yards squared, and I saw the sails fill bang up with wind, and yet, ours were slatting. The next thing was the one that hit me more than anything. Her masts took a cant forward, and then I saw her stern come up out of the mist that was around her. Then all in an instant, we could hear sounds from the vessel again, and I tell you, the men didn't seem to be shouting, but screaming. Her stern went higher. It was the most extraordinary to look at, and then she went plunk down, head foremost, right bang into the mist stuff. It's all right what Jessup says, and when we saw him swimming, I was the one who spotted him. We got out a boat quicker than a windjammer ever got out a boat before, I should think. The captain, and the mate, and the second and I are all going to sign this. Signed, William Noston, Master, J.E.G. Adams, First Mate, E.D. Brown, Second Mate, Jack T. Evan, Third Mate. That is the ending of The Ghost Pirates by William Hope Hodgson, a dark tale of the final days of a doomed vessel, plagued at sea by misfortune perhaps of a supernatural origin. It is the look into the daily lives of sailors as they unknowingly travel ever closer to their final destination. Perfect inspiration for the tabletop. So let's make a ghost story. Hello and welcome to the RPG Blender. I am your host, Game Master George, and today will be our first attempt at creating a tabletop adventure based on a work of classic and public domain literature. Hope you don't mind the longer intro. I felt getting a taste of the source material would be a good way to open this up. We'll start with a quick overview of the source, highlighting some of the strengths and difficulties, then pull them together into a system-neutral structure you can use for the game of your choice. And if you want to try running it yourself, you'll find links to the written version of this adventure in the description. Last thing before we dive in, the choice of source is a connection with Team Seas. Stick around to the end of the video to learn more about this cause. So to get us started, a quick overview of the story, making note of important concepts. This tale is told by Jessup, a crewman newly signed to the ship Morcestus. Through his retelling of events, we learn about the escalation of strange occurrences aboard the ship. He is first warned about strange goings-on before the journey begins through the cryptic message, "There's too many bloomin' shadders about this here packet." However, the first few weeks, everything passes normally, even with great luck. But just as the routine of life aboard this ship begins to settle, he sees his first oddity. The figure of a man steps over the rail to board the ship, a shadowy figure, indistinct, who climbs over the rail once more and into the sea as Jessup approaches for a better look. As the days progress, the events escalate. First, others begin seeing the figures, though most discount it as imagination or a stowaway. Not long after, however, the figures become more aggressive, picking off the occasional sailor on the higher parts of the ship by sending them plummeting down to the deck. The death toll grows, but Jessup becomes distracted by other sights. A ship's lights appear seemingly from nowhere, on course to collide with them. It vanishes when attention is called, however, rendering him incapable of diverting the ship from its collision. Thankfully, however, it reappears once more on the other side of the ship, indicating that though his fellows could not see this ship, those aboard the other could, and avoided the crash. Things culminate when, as the crew's emotions begin to boil over, Jessup and the others begin to see shadowy forms of ships beneath the water, seemingly following them and rising toward the surface. This leads to the night of the great ship, when he sees one far larger rising toward them, with shadowy masses running along the deck. A mist breaks upon the deck, coalescing into a horde of ghostly pirates who begin to slaughter the crew and take over the ship. Setting the sails to a non-existent wind, the ship dives below the sea, lost in the mist. Jessup, is the sole survivor, picked up by a nearby ship, to whom he recounts the tale, though he knows the truth of it will be well hidden. I'm sure you can identify from that some of the strengths and the challenges we'll need to overcome. The setting is a massive strength here. The isolation at sea helps to cement an eerie tone. Add to that the idea that the player characters are, following the narrative of the story, not in a position of power aboard the ship, puts things outside of their control. If they want to effect change to counter the powers at work, they must follow the chain of command and convince the officers. Or they must resort to mutiny, a dangerous proposition which may destabilize an already tenuous situation. And even should it work, they would likely end up in jail when they arrive back at port. Again, this helps build a sense of helplessness, of being alone in an unexplainable and overwhelming situation. However, the book's setup does carry one issue: the passive nature of the events. There is very little that Jessup can do to alter the course of the events. He does manage to save 2 crewmen during certain events, but his actions amount to little more than observation and pondering. This does not make for engaging gameplay, so we'll need to create some active directions for the players to pursue. Now for the action of the tale, it does a good job of charting out how we can escalate the odd occurrences. This starts small, just a questionable sight by a single member of the crew. It soon grows, however, with more people beginning to see what is happening before the first death. We must do similar, beginning with uncertain events and unreliable witnesses, before moving to events which are harder to dismiss. The horror begins as ghostly figures, but is eventually surmised to be something from outside of our dimension, rather than simply spirits. This serves to upend expectations. There is no restless ghost to exorcise. This is a dimensional invasion, masquerading as haunting, perhaps driving investigators down the wrong path. We will need to leave clues regarding this truth without outright stating it. While the actual creatures are big drives within the story, there is a secondary pressure we can use which comes from the crew itself. In the beginning, when events are isolated and deniable, the crew serves as a deterrent from sharing information, for fear of being ridiculed and ostracized. Revealing early, with insufficient proof, hurts credibility, at least until such a time as the events are too far progressed. As the story progresses, the coin flips. The crew becomes convinced of the goings-on, and begin to consider taking action of their own against what they see as inaction by the officers. At this point, information revealed can push them further into the depths of fear, provoking mutiny, or worse. This promotes again the isolation of Jessup, so we'll want to find a way to utilize this in our adventure. Finally, the story ends with the climactic surge of the ghost pirates out of the mist to take the ship. For Jessup, this is a moment of survival. There is nothing he can do to fight the hordes. He just needs to survive their assault and, eventually, escape the ship before it plunges beneath the sea. We want to find high-energy activities here, while showing that to try directly fighting these things would be impossible. So, focusing on flight rather than fight. As we jump into actually working through the adventure itself, I'd like to take a bit of time to discuss the system. This is intended to be a system-agnostic adventure, which you can take and run for your party in whatever system you would like. However, there are some aspects which will make certain systems more or less effective. First, we want a world where the supernatural isn't an accepted part of normal life. If it is, then you lose the strength of the unknown, at least for the NPCs. PCs can be aware of such things, but the knowledge should be incomplete, fringe knowledge, or the horror again loses its punch. Second, we want a system which does not promote a violent answer. The ghost pirates are meant to be escaped, not fought. This can be a system that is highly lethal, or one which downplays combat in general. Third, we'll be going for a more investigation-focused adventure here. While most systems can at least do a passing job of such, using a system with this as its primary focus can be a big leg up. Based on these requirements, 3 systems I would suggest to run this would be Call of Cthulhu, a Gumshoe game, or Aletheia. For the purpose of meeting the crew requirements, we will be introducing a fear meter to the game. This will serve to depict the growing disquiet among those working the ship. When it is low, the crew at large will discount the tales of dark things. As more of them witness events, or have the occurrences proven, the fear meter will rise, becoming more susceptible to talk of monsters, but also becoming unhappy with the seeming lack of action by those in command. If it rises too high, the crew will mutiny, seizing taking control of the ship. At this point, the crew will be arrested should they manage to make it back to land, including the PCs, unless they actively sided with the captain. Should it continue to grow, the crew will become desperate and begin hunting for a cause and scapegoat. The players now have to avoid suspicion by the crew, lest it be a mortal threat that leaves them hanging from the mizzen. Mechanically, this fear level will run from 1 to 6. Events throughout the adventure will be assigned a die type. Should the event occur, the player will roll that die type. If it exceeds the current fear level, it will increase. So, as fear increases, it will take greater escalation to keep it moving up. For example, rumors spreading about a supernatural origin for these events will be assigned a D4. A common occurrence, but once the rumor is out, it has diminishing returns, so it can only increase the fear to a total level of 4. If the fear ever reaches 5, the crew will plan and enact their mutiny. Once it reaches 6, they will turn murderous, attacking anyone seemingly suspicious. At this point, any event which would trigger a fear roll has the possibility of putting witch hunters on the player's trail. Roll a die type associated with the event. If it is higher than the current fear level, the crew has set their sights on the party. If it is lower, increase the die type for that event by 1. So a D4 becomes a D6, D6 becomes a D8, and so on. Alright, now let's meet some of the more important NPCs for this adventure. First up is Jessup himself. The narrator of the original book, he is an optional character. Introduce him as a source of knowledge for events the party may miss. If you don't want this safety net, simply leave the character out. Williams is the source of initial knowledge, the one who will initially provide the warning of shatters, though he is unwilling to reveal more. He may eventually reveal more information, however he is also the first casualty, perhaps leading to questions of an intelligent plan behind the attacks. Tamley is the crew member most affected by these events. A young man not yet jaded by a life at sea, when he witnesses events, he finds it harder than most to silence himself. He is a possible ally in investigating these events, or a danger if left to spread panic on his own. Mr. Tulipson, the second mate, is the first officer to become aware of the goings-on. While it still takes him time to accept the weirdness, he is potentially an ally to the players, so long as they are willing to play within the rules. Finally, the captain, more commonly referred to as the Old Man. He is the last potentially brought into the fold, being a source of actual change on the ship, a very valuable ally, but unforgiving of attempts to circumvent his authority. There are, of course, other named members of the crew, but they serve as extras that you can throw in. Jock, Stubbins, Plumber, Jasket, they can be victims of the ghost pirates, or they can be instigators of additional scenes. Lastly, for the setup, let's talk about the antagonist. There is debate within the book about the actual origin of the shadows, but I do believe that Jessup's explanation is correct. Creatures from another dimension rather than simple spirits. And it makes for a far more interesting story. So what is actually happening here? The book leaves it open-ended, of course, but for us, we need to know when running it. This ship is currently adrift between 2 dimensions. For the crew, they make no notice as their ship crosses between. When on the other side, they cannot see or interact with anything outside of the ship. For observers, they can see the ship and its goings-on, but while the ship is on the other side, no sound crosses. This creates the effect of the disappearing ship which Jessup observed. He would see the ship when he was in the normal world, but the ship would vanish when he drifted to the other side. Meanwhile, the other ship saw the lack of response from the Morcestis and navigated around them. The crossing to the other side is not something the crew will normally notice. To them, they are simply sailing an empty sea. When it is dark, however, or a mist rises, the beings living on the other side can act upon the crew. This is when the creatures will strike. Note the line from the novel. "I got a beastly feeling that there were things swarming down there." That is not language that you would use to describe humanoid figures going about the work of a ship. This description brings to mind a colony of insects and gives us a clearer picture of the antagonist. Extra-dimensional parasites, small flying creatures of a hive mind intelligence which latch on to items or creatures from our world. They hunt things on the border of their own dimension, probing, exploring, before eventually massing and dragging it fully into their realm. They mimic the things they consume, so when they come to our world, they take the shape of men previously taken aboard ships previously commandeered. There is little hope of fighting such a creature. You must simply find a way out of its trap. Alright, At long last, we have all the setup for this adventure completed, so let's talk a bit about how it will actually run. We begin our adventure with our heroes seeking passage aboard a ship. The location of the pickup and destinations do not matter specifically, but it should be a voyage of several weeks. Ideally, they would be signing to work the ship, with some relevant skills to help out. However, they could simply be paying for a voyage, if they don't have nautical experience. Both of these options have their own benefits. By joining the crew, they become a part of the action, the daily process of running the ship. As such, they can be positioned by their schedule, separated or connected as needed, and put in ideal locations to witness the events. On the other hand, if they're booking passage, they will likely be an outsider to the crew, unlikely to get much help from them. This gives them more of a link to the upper level, however, more easily able to interact with the mate or the captain. This also increases the threat level as the crew becomes more unhinged. However, with all of that comes more freedom to explore the ship, as they are not tied to a duty schedule. Go with whichever option fits your party better. There is, of course, an alternate start. Should you choose to, begin with your party lost at sea and being rescued by the Morcestus. This allows for an abrupt entry into the unexplained, along with suspicion from the crew. In such an event, skip past the calm days and start the fear meter at 2. No matter which option you begin with, soon after signing on, the party should have a brief encounter with Williams. Break out your best grizzled cockney to deliver his haunting line. "There's too many bloomin' shadders about this here packet." Then kick off the journey. For the first week or two, travel should occur as normal. Give your players the chance to engage in character building roleplay, or help them sink into the daily life aboard the ship with descriptions of daily duties. Treat it as if a mere filler meant to spice up the time spent aboard the ship. Once the rhythm is established, you will begin with the first event. One of the members of the party, either on night duty or off for a nighttime stroll, will spy a figure climbing aboard the ship. Indistinct at such a distance, if they approach, it will climb back over and into the sea. Try to limit the number of party members involved in this first sighting. A single viewer is ideal, but 2 at most would be helpful. We want this to be unreliable. The party will likely believe the PC from a meta standpoint, but we want a minimal exposure to start. We don't want multiple PCs able to back up this story. For each night of the voyage, you will roll against the event chart. This roll is modified by the current fear level, as well as the number of nights since an event occurred. So at a low fear, events will be more spaced out, but as fear increases, events will become more common and devastating. Now, we need to address the issue of passivity in the story. While we will not make this an adventure they can win in the sense of defeating the monster and saving the ship, the players need to be given something more substantial to do aside from simply watching events unfold. We will do this by allowing them to attempt to find the cause of the invasion. Why has this ship been targeted? Clues during the events will lead to the discovery of a piece of blue amber-like material, which contains a small opening digging down to a roughly insect-shaped hole. This contained a hive princess, expelled from this other dimension to spread the hive to new locations. It emerged from its prison several voyages back and infected a member of the crew by latching onto its head and extending its proboscis into its brain. It used the crewman's brain to transmit a signal, luring in its hive, and now is depositing blue amber-like eggs within the poor man, which will be released upon the completion of the invasion. The players will need to identify the infected crewman and find a way to deal with him. While it is too late to divert the hive from the ship, they can still prevent this from occurring again if they can deal with the clutch. The adventure moves toward its conclusion the first time the event roll is greater than 12. When that occurs, the first ghost ship events happens. By the end of this day, the adventure will conclude, so the players have only 8 hours from the time of this beginning to finish their investigation. First, at noon, there will be a single ship-like shadow seen below the waves. By 4, there will now be 4. And at 8, the great ship will be seen and the takeover begins. When that happens, the creatures board the vessel as misty pirates and begin to slay the crew. They set the sails, and before long, the ship is driven beneath the sea. Any soul still aboard the ship will be lost to the other dimension, to be devoured by the hive. And if the infected crewman was not dealt with, the eggs are released upon the waves, to be carried to other ships and continue the cycle. If the party manages to escape the boat, they will find nearby the Sangier, another vessel to take them aboard. Perhaps they will share their tale, but it will never be believed. It is one thing to witness a ship of eerie silence erupt into screams as it plunges into the sea, but another entirely to accept a tale of hauntings. And that, my friends, is our adventure based on the Ghost Pirates. Check out the written version in the links below, free unless you choose to drop a coin. And if you were going to consider doing so, perhaps give it to Team Seas instead. Team Seas is a global campaign to raise $30 million to remove 30 million pounds of plastic and trash from our oceans, rivers, and beaches. Working with the charities Ocean Conservancy and the Ocean Cleanup, let's work to clean up our seas and give future generations the same beautiful oceans we had. And speaking selfishly, I want to be able to take my son and soon-to-be arriving daughter to the beach and not have to worry about dangerous trash, lost fishing gear, or worse. So consider donating to Team Seas. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, drop a comment with a classic piece of literature you'd like to see appear as a future adventure. And of course, subscribe and click that notification bell for more tabletop content. Thank you again, and remember, there's gaming outside the Forgotten Realms.
The studio was filled with the rich odor of roses, and when the light summer wind stirred amidst the tree of the garden, there came through the open door the heavy scent of the lilac, or the more delicate perfume of the pink flowering thorn.